At 23:45 on October 19, 1942, the sea around Cape Esperance looked empty. Lieutenant Robert Lynch crouched behind the wheel of PT-48, eyes fixed on the dark water ahead. The night was overcast. No moon. Visibility barely 200 yards. The kind of darkness where distance disappeared and danger arrived without warning. Lynch was 26 years old. He had commanded PT-48 through 14 night patrols and had yet to score a confirmed kill. That statistic bothered him less than the pattern he kept seeing repeat itself across the Solomon Islands. Japanese supply barges appeared at night. American PT boats detected them. Torpedoes were launched. The torpedoes missed. The barges returned fire. PT boats withdrew or burned. Squadron 3 had already lost 6 boats in these waters. 17 sailors were dead. Every loss followed the same script. Ahead of PT-48, 3 Japanese Daihatsu barges cut through the black water in line formation. Each carried troops and ammunition bound for Guadalcanal. Each was armored with steel plate thick enough to shrug off rifle fire. Each mounted a Type 92 heavy machine gun amidships. Lynch's torpedoes were useless against them. PT-48 carried 4 Mark 8 torpedoes. Each weighed over 2,000 pounds and carried a massive TNT warhead. Their minimum depth setting was 10 feet. The barges drew barely 5. Any torpedo launched would pass harmlessly underneath. The twin .50 caliber Brownings mounted on the boat's turrets could spit out hundreds of rounds per minute. Against wooden fishing boats, they were devastating. Against armored barges, they were sparks against steel. The Japanese understood this. They had adapted. When American aircraft made destroyer runs too dangerous, the Japanese shifted to barges, slower, smaller, harder to spot, and immune to torpedoes. The Americans called these nightly runs the Tokyo Express. By October, the Express was running on barges alone. Guadalcanal was starving under it. Henderson Field sat only 3 miles inland from Lunga Point. The Marines had captured it in August, but by October it was a wreck. Burned-out aircraft lined the runway. Japanese bombers hit it almost daily. American fighters scrambled whatever could still fly. Damaged Wildcats, worn-out Airacobras, planes that sometimes crashed on landing and never flew again. Those wrecks littered the coral around the field, and inside many of them was something no one had considered using at sea. Lynch watched the barges slide closer and did the math again in his head. 3 barges, 60 troops per hull. Ammunition and food stacked on deck. 20 to 30 such barges ran this route every night. Torpedoes would never stop that. Single-shot anti-tank guns lashed to PT boats were desperate improvisations, barely better than nothing. 1 round. Manual reload. 8 seconds of exposure under machine gun fire. It was not a solution. But somewhere behind Lynch on Henderson Field lay dozens of wrecked P-39 Airacobras. Broken wings, seized engines, shattered fuselages. And in the nose of each one, still intact, sat a weapon designed to kill light armor at close range. A 37mm automatic cannon. Lynch did not know yet how he would make it work. But he knew one thing with certainty. If PT boats did not change, they would keep dying the same way. The idea formed on land, not at sea. When PT-48 returned to its anchorage before dawn, Lynch did not go to sleep. He took a jeep inland toward Henderson Field, driving past the twisted hulks of aircraft that had been left where they fell. The field was barely operational. Mechanics worked under tarps. Pilots slept beside their planes. Bomb craters pocked the coral runway. The wrecks of P-39 Airacobras lay everywhere. Most were beyond repair. Engines seized, wings torn off, fuselages split by flak or bad landings. But their noses were intact. And in those noses sat the same weapon, over and over again, the Oldsmobile-built M4 37mm cannon, designed to punch through light armor at short range. Lynch stopped beside one of the wrecks and crouched to look closer. The gun was heavy, but not impossibly so. Recoil was significant, but manageable. Ammunition came in compact clips. At close range, a single hit could rip through steel plate that shrugged off machine gun fire. It was exactly what PT boats lacked. The problem was everything else. PT boats were built for speed, not stability. They were narrow, light, and fast, designed to deliver torpedoes and disappear. Mounting an aircraft cannon on the bow risked capsizing, structural failure, or simply tearing the deck apart under recoil. No regulation covered this. No manual suggested it. That made it dangerous. Lynch took the idea to the boat's chief mechanic first. The response was immediate skepticism. The deck would need reinforcement. The recoil would have to be absorbed. Ammunition storage would be improvised. Nothing about it was safe. "Will it stop a barge?" Lynch asked. The mechanic hesitated, then nodded once. Next came the commander. The squadron commander listened in silence as Lynch laid it out. Torpedoes passing under barges. Machine guns failing against armor. Nightly losses continuing without result. He knew the numbers. He had signed the reports. He had written letters home. "You fire that thing once, and the Japanese will see you from miles away," he said. "They already see us," Lynch replied. "They just don't respect us." Permission was not granted in words. It was granted in time. No one ordered the work. No one stopped it either. By afternoon, mechanics were unbolting the cannon from the wrecked Airacobra and dragging it toward the shoreline. Steel plates were scavenged, beams were cut and welded. The bow of PT-48 began to change shape, quietly and without paperwork. A naval patrol boat was becoming something else. By sunset, the cannon sat where torpedoes had once promised solutions they could not deliver. The deck creaked under its weight. The recoil mounts looked crude but solid. Ammunition was stacked where it would not slide under hard turns. Lynch stood on the bow and rested a hand on the gun housing. There were no trials, no range testing, no safety margins. Only a simple question remained. Would it work before it killed them? Night fell again over the Solomon Sea, and the barges would be back. The sea was calm, which made everything worse. Flat water reflected engine noise and muzzle flashes, turning sound into a warning that traveled far. PT-48 crept forward at low speed, engines throttled back, hull cutting quietly through the black surface. Lynch stood at the bow beside the improvised cannon, eyes fixed ahead, waiting for the shapes to resolve. They appeared as shadows first. 3 barges, moving steadily toward Guadalcanal, their outlines low and blunt against the water. No evasive maneuvers, no concern. They had crossed this route too many times without serious opposition. The Americans had never challenged them up close, until now. Lynch waited until the distance collapsed to less than 200 yards. Closer than doctrine allowed. Close enough to smell fuel and hear voices carry across the water. The barge's machine guns had not yet opened fire. The Japanese crews had not recognized the threat. "Fire!" the cannon roared. The first 37mm round slammed into the lead barge just above the waterline. Steel plate ruptured outward. The impact sounded like a hammer striking a bell, followed by tearing metal and shouts. The barge slowed instantly, listing as water poured in. Before the shock settled, the second round hit. This one punched through the deck, detonating among stacked supplies. Fire blossomed briefly, then smoke rolled across the water. Men scattered. The machine gun amidships fell silent. The barges reacted at once. Searchlights snapped on. Machine guns opened up, tracers stitching toward PT-48's bow. Bullets ricocheted off the reinforced deck plating. Splinters flew. The PT boat surged forward, engines screaming now, closing the distance instead of retreating. The cannon fired again. The second barge took the hit broadside. The round penetrated cleanly, exiting the far side in a spray of sparks and debris. The hull sagged. Flames spread along the deck. The vessel slowed, then stopped entirely. The third barge tried to turn away. Lynch tracked it manually, compensating for the PT boat's speed and the sea's motion. He fired once more. The round struck the stern, smashing the rudder assembly. The barge spun uselessly, dead in the water. The engagement lasted less than a minute. When it ended, 2 barges burned and sank slowly. The third drifted, disabled, its crew abandoning ship into the dark water. PT-48 tore past the wreckage at full throttle, machine guns firing briefly to suppress any remaining resistance, before disappearing into darkness. Silence returned to the sea. Aboard PT-48, no one spoke for several seconds. The deck vibrated with engine noise. Smoke drifted backward. The cannon's barrel glowed faintly in the dark. Then someone laughed, short, sharp, disbelieving. It had worked. Not partially. Not theoretically. Completely. The Tokyo Express had just lost something it relied on more than speed. Immunity. The next night the barges came again. They always did. Japanese commanders believed the loss had been an anomaly. Bad luck, poor visibility, a single, careless crew. Supply schedules did not change, routes did not shift. The Tokyo Express continued to run, confident that American PT boats remained what they had always been: fast, dangerous at long range, and ultimately ineffective against armored barges. PT-48 waited. This time, Lynch did not need surprise alone. He needed confirmation. The cannon had worked once. That proved nothing, unless it worked again under pressure. The barges appeared shortly after midnight, moving faster than before, tighter together, machine guns already manned. Searchlights swept the water. The enemy had adjusted, but not enough. PT-48 surged forward at full throttle. Machine gun fire erupted immediately, tracers cutting across the bow. The PT boat did not turn away. It closed the distance aggressively, bow lifting as speed increased. Lynch braced himself against the recoil mounts and waited until the lead barge filled his sight. The first round struck center mass. Armor failed exactly as it had the night before. Steel split. Fire erupted. The barge shuddered and slowed, becoming an obstacle for the vessels behind it. Confusion spread instantly through the formation. The second shot followed without pause. This time, the barge exploded. Not dramatically, but decisively. Ammunition and fuel ignited together, tearing open the deck. Men jumped into the water. The machine gun never fired a second burst. The remaining barges scattered. One tried to run for shore. Another turned directly toward PT-48, firing wildly. Lynch adjusted and fired again. The round punched through the bow and out the stern, killing the engine in a spray of metal. The barge drifted helplessly, dead in the water. PT-48 withdrew its speed, engines screaming, bullets skipping off the wake behind them. No pursuit followed. By dawn, reports filtered in from patrols and reconnaissance aircraft. Barges had sunk. Supplies had not arrived. Japanese units on Guadalcanal went hungry that day. Word spread fast, on both sides. Other PT crews visited PT-48's mooring, staring at the cannon bolted to the bow. Mechanics asked questions. Officers took notes. No one needed convincing anymore. The evidence floated or sank off the coast. The Japanese reacted too. Barges began traveling closer to shore. Routes shifted. Loads were reduced. Escorts increased. The Tokyo Express slowed, no longer confident in its immunity. But adaptation takes time. And time was the one thing the Japanese could not afford to lose. Each night the cannon fired, another link in the supply chain snapped. Each disabled barge meant fewer troops, less ammunition, and weaker defenses ashore. The war did not change overnight, but its balance did. PT boats were no longer nuisances. They had become executioners, and the enemy had learned that lesson far too late. Success never stays isolated for long. Within days, crews from neighboring PT squadrons began stopping by PT-48's berth. They walked the bow slowly, running hands over welds and mounts, studying the improvised recoil system as if it were a puzzle that finally made sense. Questions followed about balance, feed rates, reload times, and what happened when the sea wasn't calm. Mechanics answered where they could. Lynch answered where it mattered. "This works," he said, "but only if you're willing to get close." That caveat mattered. The cannon did not turn PT boats into distant killers. It demanded nerve. Engagement ranges shrank. Reaction times compressed. Crews had to accept incoming fire as the price of decisive hits. The weapon changed the fight, but it did not make it safer. Commanders took notice. After-action reports stacked up with the same pattern. Barges disabled at close range, supply runs interrupted, Japanese escorts retreating sooner than expected. The language in those reports shifted from curiosity to recommendation. What had begun as a field improvisation started to look like doctrine. Approval followed, cautiously. Squadron commanders authorized similar modifications on a limited number of boats. Aircraft cannons were salvaged from Henderson field wrecks. Bow decks were reinforced. Ammunition was reallocated. No formal manuals appeared yet, but guidance circulated. How to brace the mounts, how to fire in short sequences, how to disengage before escorts could concentrate fire. The learning curve was steep. Some crews damaged their own decks. Others misjudged recoil and lost accuracy. A few boats took hits they could not outrun. The cannon was not a magic answer. It was a tool that demanded discipline and judgment. Still, the effect was undeniable. The Tokyo Express slowed further. Barges hugged shorelines and moved in smaller groups. Escorts increased, spreading Japanese firepower thinner across routes. Supply deliveries arrived late or not at all. Japanese units ashore adapted by rationing, improvising, and eventually retreating. PT tactics evolved alongside the weapon. Boats operated in pairs, one closing to fire, the other covering with machine guns. Ambush points were chosen carefully, using islands and reefs to mask approach. Night engagements became shorter and more violent, with barges disabled before they could react fully. The psychological impact matched the physical one. Japanese crews, once confident in barge armor, now faced sudden, catastrophic hits at close range. Survivors spread the word. Hesitation crept into runs that had once been routine. The sea lanes grew tense and unpredictable. By the end of October, what had started as an improvised solution had altered nightly operations across the sector. PT boats were no longer dismissed as fast nuisances. They were treated as real threats, ones that demanded caution and resources. A new doctrine was taking shape, not in classrooms or headquarters, but in dark water and close-range fights. And it was born from a simple realization. When the enemy adapts, survival belongs to those who adapt faster. The new tactic carried a price, and everyone involved understood it. Mounting a cannon on a PT boat solved one problem by creating another. To be effective, the weapon demanded proximity. Barges had to be engaged at distances measured in dozens of yards, not hundreds. That meant exposing wooden hulls and lightly armored crews to concentrated machine gun fire. Speed alone could no longer guarantee safety. Some crews paid immediately. Boats that misjudged approach angles took rounds through the bow and bridge. One PT lost steering when a burst tore through control cables. Another caught fire and barely escaped before flames reached fuel tanks. Repairs became constant. Casualty lists grew longer, even as successes multiplied. Lynch never hid this reality. When asked whether the cannon made PT duty safer, he answered honestly. It made it decisive, not safe. Barges died faster. But the margin for error shrank to almost nothing. Hesitation or poor coordination meant taking hits at point-blank range. Crews adapted again. Approaches became more disciplined. Boats timed their runs to seconds. Machine gun teams suppressed barge decks just long enough for the cannon to fire. After a single or second shot, PT boats disengaged immediately, engines at full throttle, smoke and spray masking withdrawal. Night after night, this rhythm repeated. Success depended less on bravery than on precision. Crews that treated the cannon as a panic weapon suffered. Crews that treated it as a scalpel survived. Training shifted accordingly, built not on manuals, but on scars and repairs. The enemy responded with escalation. Barges added extra armor where possible. Machine gun crews were reinforced. Escorts increased again, sometimes including small patrol craft with heavier weapons. The water around Guadalcanal became a lethal maze of overlapping fire zones. Yet the fundamental imbalance remained. The cannon hit harder than anything the barges could absorb. One accurate shot still ended the fight. Japanese commanders faced an ugly choice: slow deliveries with heavier protection or fast deliveries with unacceptable losses. Either option weakened forces ashore. The cost was felt on both sides. American PT crews faced higher immediate risk. Japanese supply units faced steady attrition they could not replace. Over time, the latter proved more damaging. Lynch lost boats from his squadron. He attended briefings that began with names instead of maps. He wrote letters that avoided details. Every success carried the knowledge that someone else might not come back from the next run. This was the nature of the adaptation. Victory did not arrive without sacrifice. It arrived because the cost imposed on the enemy exceeded the cost paid by those delivering it. Closing the distance worked, but it demanded everything from the men who did it. The change did not come all at once. At first, the nights simply felt different. Barges appeared later than usual. Routes shifted unpredictably. Some nights, nothing came at all. PT crews waited in the dark, engines idling, scanning empty water where targets had once been guaranteed. Japanese supply runs were faltering. Reports from shore confirmed it. Units on Guadalcanal began rationing ammunition and food more aggressively. Artillery fire grew sporadic. Patrols thinned. The steady pressure that had once defined Japanese operations eased, replaced by caution and delay. The Tokyo Express was slowing down. PT boats continued to patrol, but engagements became less frequent. When barges did appear, they moved closer to shore, hugging reefs and shallows, often turning back at the first sign of opposition. Escorts lingered at longer distances, unwilling to close with boats that now carried weapons capable of killing with a single hit. The cannon had altered behavior as much as it altered outcomes. For Lynch and his crews, this shift was unmistakable. Nights that once guaranteed contact now passed in tense quiet. The sea felt larger. Darkness stretched uninterrupted. The absence of gunfire carried its own weight, signaling that something fundamental had changed. Commanders took notice. Operational reports showed a clear correlation between cannon-equipped PT boats and reduced enemy movement. Supply tonnage delivered by barge dropped sharply. Japanese commanders diverted resources elsewhere, conceding routes that had once been vital. The fighting did not end completely. Isolated clashes still occurred. A barge would try its luck. A PT boat would respond. But the rhythm was broken. What had been routine became risky. What had been reliable became uncertain. That uncertainty favored the Americans. The campaign around Guadalcanal shifted decisively. With supplies choked, Japanese forces could no longer sustain offensive operations. Defensive positions weakened. Morale declined. The long struggle for the island began to tilt irreversibly. For the PT crews, the quiet was earned. They had not defeated the enemy in a single battle. They had worn him down night by night, forcing adaptation that came too late and cost too much. The water had grown hostile for Japanese barges in ways it never had been before. Eventually, patrols were reassigned. Boats moved to new areas. The cannon that had once been an improvised gamble became standard equipment. What began as an experiment ended as accepted practice. The sea did not announce the shift. It simply stopped offering targets. And that silence spoke louder than any explosion. In war, change rarely comes from permission. It comes from necessity, from moments when existing answers stop working and someone decides to try something else. The story of the cannon-mounted PT boats is one of those moments, born not in a planning room, but in black water under enemy fire. Lieutenant Robert Lynch did not invent a new weapon. He repurposed one that already existed. He did not follow doctrine. He stepped beyond it, because doctrine had failed to protect his crews. The risk he accepted was immediate and personal. If the cannon tore the deck apart, if recoil capsized the boat, if the enemy closed faster than expected, there would be no appeal and no retreat. But the risk worked. By forcing engagement at close range, PT boats reversed the logic of the Tokyo Express. Barges that had relied on immunity suddenly became fragile. Supply runs that had once been routine turned into calculated gambles. Japanese commanders were forced to slow down, reroute, and spread resources thinner across the coast. The effect was cumulative rather than dramatic. No single night ended the enemy's effort. Instead, pressure mounted steadily. Fewer supplies arrived. Units ashore weakened. Operational tempo declined. The sea lanes around Guadalcanal became hostile territory for vessels that had once moved through them unchallenged. The legacy of that shift extended beyond one campaign. What began as an improvised solution hardened into accepted practice. PT boats across the theater adopted heavier forward firepower. Tactics evolved to emphasize precision, coordination, and decisive engagement over speed alone. The small, fast patrol boat gained a new identity, not just as a torpedo platform, but as a close-range hunter. There was a cost. Crews faced greater danger. Engagements became shorter and more violent. Losses did not disappear. But the balance of loss changed. Over time, the enemy paid more for each attempt than the Americans did to stop it. That imbalance decided the outcome. After the war, the details faded into technical histories and footnotes. The wrecked Airacobras rusted away. The barges sank and were forgotten. What remained was the lesson. When an enemy adapts, survival belongs to those who adapt faster. Lynch's decision mattered not because it was bold, but because it was early. He recognized a pattern before it became fatal and broke it while there was still time. That timing, more than the cannon itself, made the difference. Some victories are loud, marked by headlines and ceremonies. Others arrive quietly, announced only by empty sea lanes and nights without contact. Those quiet victories shape wars just as surely, and they endure long after the water goes still.